There's a question that haunts anyone who studies the past seriously. Why do entire centuries go blurry? Not blurry because nothing happened. Blurry because we can't see what happened. The people were there. They lived, worked, loved, fought, built, destroyed. They had names, they had stories. And then, silence. Not the silence of an empty room, the silence of a room where someone was just speaking and stopped. Tonight we're going to explore that silence. Not one era, but several. Not one mystery, but a pattern. Because when you line up history's darkest centuries, the periods that resist explanation, that generate endless debate, that spawn conspiracy theories, you start to notice something. They share a cause, and that cause isn't what you think. If you're the kind of person who can't stand an unanswered question, this episode is for you. If you want history that takes uncertainty seriously without inventing easy answers, subscribe now. Then let's walk into the silence together. The term Dark Ages gets thrown around a lot, usually as an insult, a way of saying those people were primitive, ignorant, backwards. But that's not what the term originally meant. Caesar Baronius coined the Latin phrase saculum obscurum in 1602, and he used it specifically because of the lack of writers, not because the people were barbaric, because they left fewer records. The darkness wasn't in them. It was in us, in our inability to see. Oxford University Press has actually banned its authors from using Dark Ages because the term carries so much judgmental baggage. It obscures the methodological reality. We simply have fewer sources. So imagine you're a monk in the year 980. Your world hasn't ended. But the paper has. The teachers are gone. The roads aren't safe. And one day you realize nobody is writing down what you're living through. Your children will know you existed. Your grandchildren might remember your name. But 1,000 years from now? Silence. History doesn't go dark randomly. It goes dark when something fragile breaks. But what? What's the fragile thing? To answer that, we need to look at the most dramatic civilizational collapse in recorded history. A moment when the entire Mediterranean world burned and then went quiet for 400 years. The Bronze Age collapse, and what it reveals about why the past disappears. A civilization doesn't disappear all at once. First, the records stop. Then, the reasons disappear. Then, the memories. Around 1200 BCE, the world burned. Not metaphorically, literally. Destruction layers of ash and rubble appear at dozens of sites across the eastern Mediterranean within a 50-year window. Cities that had flourished for centuries were abandoned overnight. Trade networks that spanned continents collapsed. Writing systems that had recorded human thought for generations vanished. The Mycenaean palaces of Greece, gone. The Hittite Empire that had rivaled Egypt, erased. Ugarit, the great trading city of Syria, burned and never reoccupied. Egypt survived but diminished, entering a long decline from which it would never fully recover. And here's the strangest part. We have letters from the final days. We have inscriptions from the victors. We have archaeological evidence from the destruction layers. And we still don't know exactly what happened. The final letters from Ugarit provide history's most haunting window into civilizational collapse in real time. Archaeologists found tablets unbaked in scribes' kilns, ready for dispatch, but never sent. The city was destroyed so suddenly, that administrative work stopped mid-process. Think about that. A scribe sits down to work, shapes clay, presses symbols, and before the tablet can be fired, before the message can be sent, the ink stops flowing. King Amurapi sent a desperate letter to the king of Cyprus. His cities were burning, his troops were far away, his ships were gone. "The country is abandoned to itself," he wrote. 7 enemy ships had already inflicted terrible damage. The response from Carchemish offered only advice: no troops, remain firm, surround your towns with ramparts. Ugarit fell around 1185 BCE. It was never reoccupied. The scribes left. The archive became a tomb. The tablet sat unbaked for 3,000 years. The Egyptians recorded their version on the walls of Medinet Habu, the mortuary temple of Rameses III. His Year 8 inscription describes foreign countries making a conspiracy in their islands. All at once the lands were scattered. No one could stand before them. Hatti, Carchemish, Arzawa, Alashia, cut off at one time. The enemies are named Peleset, Cheka, Shekelesh, Denyen, Weshesh. The Sea Peoples, a term that Egyptologist Emmanuel de Rouget actually coined in 1855, not the ancient sources themselves. The relief carvings show distinctive warriors with feathered headdresses, ships with bird-head prows, and, crucially, ox carts carrying women and children. That last detail matters. Raiders travel light. Migrants bring their families. Whatever the Sea Peoples were, they weren't just raiding. They were running from something. So who were they? Where did they come from? Why did they suddenly become irresistible to empires that had defeated similar threats for centuries? Here's where the scholarly debate begins. And here's where we have to sit with uncertainty. Multiple theories compete. Each has substantial evidence. Each has significant limitations. The Sea Peoples invasion theory points to Egyptian records and destruction layers at coastal sites. But it can't explain where these attackers originated, why they suddenly became unstoppable, or whether they caused the collapse or merely exploited it. What if they weren't the cause, but a symptom? Climate data tells a different story. The 3.2 kilo-year mega-drought lasted 150 to 300 years, beginning around 1200 BCE. Pollen records from Syria, sediment cores from the Sea of Galilee, all show unprecedented decline. A 2023 Nature study pinpointed a severe continuous drought in the Hittite heartland during 1198 to 1196 BCE, 3 consecutive years of failed harvests. A palace accountant stares at an empty granary, still trying to record numbers that no longer exist. Stanford geophysicist Amos Noor proposed an earthquake storm, a 50-year sequence of major earthquakes that unzipped plate boundaries across the region. When 20th century earthquake intensity maps are overlaid on destruction sites, virtually all late Bronze Age sites lie within high shaking zones. You rebuild the wall. The next week, it falls again. And then there's warfare itself. Robert Drews argued that a shift from chariot warfare to infantry warfare caused the collapse. Bronze Age kingdoms measured power in chariots, but infantry using new slashing swords discovered they could swarm and defeat chariot armies. Over 9,000 swords were captured from a single Libyan raid on Egypt in 1208 BCE. Your chariot is useless in an alley full of men with blades. Eric Klein's synthesis, what he calls the perfect storm model, is probably closest to truth. Each factor alone was survivable. These civilizations had faced drought before, earthquakes before, raids before. But simultaneous occurrence created multiplier effects, cascading failures, one broken system stressing another until the whole network collapsed. That's the best explanation we have, and it's still incomplete. After the destructions, Greece entered approximately 400 years without writing. Linear B, the script used by Mycenaean palaces, disappeared. Not gradually, completely. Why? Because Linear B served solely palatial economic administration. Only a few dozen scribal hands have been identified. Literacy was restricted to a tiny elite. When palaces fell, there was no need to keep records about commerce. Writing didn't just decline, it vanished. The population collapsed alongside literacy. Up to 90% of small Peloponnese sites were abandoned. By the early Iron Age, only 4 major centers maintained populations over 1,000. Hesiod, writing around 700 BCE during the Dark Ages aftermath, preserved cultural memory of the transition. He wished he had nothing to do with his generation, the Iron Age. Not a day goes by, he wrote, that a man doesn't have some kind of trouble. The recovery came through contact with the Levant. Phoenician trade links restored around 900 BCE, leading to the adoption of the Greek alphabet around 800 BCE. The silence lasted 4 centuries. And then it ended. Here's something important about the evidence. Archaeologist Jesse Millick conducted a systematic review in 2021. Of 148 sites with destruction events attributed to around 1200 BCE, 61% have been misdated, assumed on little evidence, or simply never happened. This doesn't mean the collapse didn't happen. The confirmed destructions are real and devastating. Ugarit burned, Hattusa burned, Pylos burned, Mycenae burned. But it means the evidence is messier than the narratives suggest. And that messiness matters, because when the evidence is messy, people start inventing cleaner explanations. We'll come back to that. Now here's what the Bronze Age collapse reveals. History didn't go dark because nothing happened. History went dark because the systems that recorded history collapsed. Writing requires trained scribes. Scribes require institutions, palaces, temples that employ them. Institutions require economic surplus. Surplus requires stable agriculture. Agriculture requires predictable climate. Trade networks spread writing materials, ideas, trained personnel. When any of these elements fails, the others become vulnerable. When multiple elements fail simultaneously. The registry closes. No one replaces the dead scribes. And 400 years later, people are left wondering what happened. This is the pattern, and it repeats. Greece lost writing for 4 centuries. Rome lost something worse. The entire machine that kept the world legible. The Roman Empire was a recording machine. Censuses counted citizens. Courts documented proceedings. Diplomats filed reports. Tax collectors kept registers. Military diplomas recorded every soldier's service. And then, gradually, the machine broke down. The early medieval period in Western Europe, roughly 500 to 900 CE, shows what happens when sophisticated recording systems collapse. Not because people stopped living, because the infrastructure that documented their lives stopped functioning. The demographic collapse was significant, though estimates vary. The Roman Empire at its height held somewhere between 70 million and 50 million people. by 600 to 800. Europe's population had fallen to approximately 25 to 35 million. Some historians estimate total European population loss of 50 to 60% between 541 and 700. Literacy collapsed outside ecclesiastical institutions. Roman literacy estimates range from 10 to 30%. Early medieval estimates fall under 20%, concentrated almost entirely in monasteries. Kings employed bishops and clergy as administrators because secular elites increasingly lacked literacy. If you were alive then, what would you write down first? And who would you trust to do the writing? Two writers provide most of our narrative information about this period. Both were churchmen with explicit ecclesiastical agendas. Gregory of Tours completed his History of the Franks around 591 CE. His Latin was relatively poor compared to classical standards. His motivation was explicit, to show the importance and strength of Christianity. He admitted he took no pleasure in writing about civil wars. The History of the Franks remains the only source covering the Franks in the decaying Roman Empire for nearly 2 centuries. The only source. For an entire civilization, would you trust a history written by the only people who can still read? Bede the Venerable completed his ecclesiastical history of the English people around 731 CE. Most of his informants came from eastern Britain, leaving significant gaps in knowledge of the western areas, and Bede had an agenda amplifying Northumbria's role over Mercia. Historian Walter Goffert's assessment applies to both. History was the medium of the writings, not its goal. We're seeing the past through ecclesiastical lenses, and those lenses were narrow. 2 catastrophic events in quick succession devastated the late antique world. In early 536 CE, a volcanic eruption ejected vast amounts of sulfate aerosols into the atmosphere. Byzantine historian Procopius recorded that the sun gave forth its light without brightness, like the moon, during the whole year. Cassiodorus marveled to see no shadows at noon. The sun appeared bluish. Imagine standing in a field at noon and casting no shadow. Imagine looking up at a sun that gives light, but no warmth. Imagine watching your crops wither because the summer never came. Tree ring analysis confirms the contemporary accounts. Danish oak trees showed 33% growth reduction in 536 and 53% reduction in 539. A second major eruption occurred in 539 or 540, more than 100 times larger than Mount St. Helens. Summer temperatures fell by as much as 2.5 degrees Celsius below normal. Harvard historian Michael McCormick called 536 the beginning of one of the worst periods to be alive, if not the worst year. The decade following 536 was the coldest on record for 2,000 years. In 541 CE, bubonic plague arrived in Egypt. By spring 542, it reached Constantinople. Victims suffered from delusions, nightmares, fevers and swellings in the groin, armpits, and behind the ears. Bodies were left stacked in the open. Funeral rites went unattended. The entire city smelled like the dead. Emperor Justinian ordered vast pits dug. When these overflowed, bodies were stuffed into city wall towers with quicklime or loaded onto ships, pushed out to sea, and set alight. The cascade was devastating. Volcanic winter led to crop failure. Crop failure led to famine. Famine weakened immune systems. Weakened populations succumbed to plague. Plague caused population collapse. Fewer people meant fewer scribes. Fewer scribes meant fewer records. Irish chronicles lamented a failure of bread from 536 to 539. Within a generation, the infrastructure of documentation had crumbled. The archive became a tomb. The ink dried, the registry closed, and we're left with Gregory of Tours, who didn't want to write about civil wars, and Bede, who only talked to people from eastern Britain. Belgian historian Henri Pirenne argued about when classical civilization truly ended. His famous summary: without Islam, the Frankish Empire would have probably never existed, and Charlemagne, without Muhammad, would be inconceivable. Critics responded that Islamic tradition has no blanket prohibition on trade with non-Muslims. The debate continues. And that's precisely the point. Historians genuinely argue about this period, not because they're hiding something, but because the evidence is fragmentary and ambiguous. That ambiguity is real, it's uncomfortable, and it creates a vacuum. What happens when the record-keeping machine doesn't just weaken, but gets rebuilt by people with agendas? When there's too much information, all of it biased, all of it competing? That's the 17th century. The 17th century challenges our assumptions about historical darkness. Unlike the Bronze Age collapse or early medieval period, this era left abundant written records: diaries, court proceedings, diplomatic correspondence, pamphlets, newspapers, scientific treatises. And yet historians still argue about what unified these events, or whether they should be unified at all, because the 17th century was simultaneously a catastrophe and a transformation. The old world died, the new world emerged, and the transition was written in blood. Hugh Trevor Roper's 1959 article launched decades of controversy. The middle of the 17th century, he argued, was a period of revolutions. They differed from place to place. Studied separately, they seemed to rise from local causes, but together they looked like a general revolution. The debate continues, but whatever caused it, the simultaneous upheaval is undeniable. Picture Magdeburg, 1631. A prosperous Protestant city of 25,000, walls, churches, markets, families, children learning to read, merchants arguing over prices, the ordinary noise of civilization. Then the imperial army breaks through. Within hours, 20,000 are dead. The cathedral burns. The smell of smoke and blood hangs over the ruins for weeks. Survivors later describe streets so thick with corpses you couldn't walk without stepping on the dead. One city, one day, 80% of its people gone. This happened across Germany for 30 years. The 30 Years' War killed between 4.5 and 8 million. Germany's population dropped from 20 million to somewhere between 12 and 16 million. Some areas lost over half their people. Only 3% died from direct military action. 64% from plague, 12% from starvation. Before World War I, it was the most destructive conflict in European history. The English Civil War killed approximately 180,000 to 250,000 across Britain. Charles I's execution on January 30th, 1649, marked the first time a head of state was tried for war crimes. In France, the Fronde saw Paris mobs using slings to smash windows, barricades erected, the young Louis XIV fleeing his capital. In China, the Ming-Qing transition killed over 20 to 25 million. The Chongzhen emperor hanged himself as Beijing fell, Spain faced revolts in Catalonia, Portugal, and Naples. The Ottoman Sultan Ibrahim was deposed and strangled. Russia underwent urban rebellions. Jeremiah Whitaker declared in a 1643 sermon, "These days are days of shaking." And this shaking is universal. Geoffrey Parker's 2013 global crisis provided a unifying explanation: climate. The Little Ice Age brought average cooling of 1 to 2 degrees Celsius below modern norms. The 17th century was the coldest century. Rivers froze, glaciers advanced, growing seasons shortened by several weeks. Iceland lost half its population. Climate disruption led to crop failures. Crop failures led to famine. Famine led to disease. Disease led to population decline. Population decline led to economic stress. Economic stress led to higher taxes. Higher taxes led to revolt. Revolts weakened states. The calamities were not only unprecedented, they were agonizingly widespread. French historian Paul Hazard focused on what emerged from the chaos. Between 1680 and 1715, a crisis within the European mind produced a new understanding of people, nature, government, and religion, preparing the way for the French Revolution. The 17th century is sometimes called the forgotten century because it lacks clear narrative. But what changed was permanent. The Peace of Westphalia principles of nation-state sovereignty remain the basis of international law to this day. Religious warfare ended as a primary cause of conflict. Standing armies became permanent. The modern world emerged through catastrophe. And when you have too much information, too many pamphlets, too many agendas, too many competing versions, you get a new kind of darkness. Not silence, noise. Before writing, human experience was transmitted solely through memory, oral tradition, and material culture. This represents not a gap in the historical record, but its fundamental condition. More than 99% of human existence is prehistoric, approximately 195,000 years without written records, approximately 5,200 years with them. The Population Reference Bureau estimates that approximately 117 billion human beings have ever been born on Earth. Today's 8 billion represent only 6.7% of all humans who ever lived. No demographic data exist for more than 99% of the span of human existence. An estimated 40% of all humans who ever lived did not survive their first birthday. These billions of lives, their names, beliefs, relationships, sufferings, joys, are permanently invisible to us. Material culture reveals stone tools, skeletal remains, settlement patterns, technology levels, trade networks, and genetic relationships through ancient DNA. It cannot reveal names of individuals, languages spoken unless written, religious beliefs and mythologies, personal motivations and emotions, political events and decisions, or why specific actions were taken. Understanding why ancient cultures built Stonehenge remains a challenge 5,000 years after the first monoliths were erected. The materials that survive create systematic distortions. Papyrus, parchment, and paper are fragile. This explains why most papyrus documents are found in the dry sand of Egypt, while they barely survive elsewhere. Baked clay is more robust. If the Babylonians had only used perishable materials, Assyriology might never have existed. What survives? Stone, ceramics, metals, bones in favorable conditions. What rarely survives? Wood, leather, textiles, plant materials, food, Paper, basketry. We know about durable objects, elite burials, exceptional environments, and moments of destruction. We know almost nothing about ordinary wooden tools, everyday textiles, or the homes of common people. Oral tradition has hard limits. Research established that under optimal conditions, orally shared knowledge can demonstrably endure more than 7,000 years, quite possibly 10,000, but probably not much longer. But oral traditions adapt to audience and context. They vary with each retelling. They merge events and characters over time. They lose specificity, names, dates, precise sequences. They preserve meaning, not facts. So much of the past is like dark matter to us. History is rather like paleontology. Dinosaur bones get fossilized, but the soft bodies of worms do not. We know what the model should look like, but often what we have are the bones of those creatures most easily preserved. The fact of preservation skews our perception. Scientists may one day discover the nature of the dark matter that shaped our universe, but historians will never be able to account for all the lives lived that have brought us to this present moment. We can vaguely see the effects sometimes. But that is all. When the record goes silent, your brain does what it always does. It tries to finish the story. The same pattern-seeking cognition that makes us excellent at detecting predators makes us prone to seeing intentional agency in random events. Conspiracy theories about history emerge not from stupidity, but from a universal human need for coherent narratives, especially when legitimate experts acknowledge uncertainty. You've probably encountered some of these theories online. The Tartaria conspiracy claims a vast civilization possessing wireless-free energy was deliberately erased from history. Reality: Tartary was simply a European cartographic convention for Central Asia, not a political entity. The mudflood theory claims a catastrophic global flood buried first floors of buildings worldwide. Reality: foundations are deliberately built underground. Many cities underwent deliberate regrading. Seattle in 1907 is well documented. The phantom time hypothesis claims 297 years were fabricated. Charlemagne never existed. The theory was universally rejected as fundamentally flawed after scholarly review. Why do people believe these theories? 3 core psychological motives, epistemic motives, the need to understand. When people feel uncertain or overwhelmed, they may turn to conspiracy theories to feel like they've uncovered a hidden truth. Existential motives, the need to feel safe. When people feel anxious, they may adopt conspiracy beliefs to make the world seem more predictable. Social motives, the need for belonging. We know the truth, and others don't. Proportionality bias makes elaborate explanations feel appropriate for significant events. A grand Tartarian civilization feels right as an explanation for elaborate architecture, more than accepting that ordinary craftsmen built beautiful things. These aren't character flaws. They're universal human tendencies. Here's why these theories collapse. Multiple independent lines of evidence converge on the same timeline, making fabrication physically impossible. Dendrochronology, tree ring dating, provides conclusive evidence. Trees produce annual growth rings. Cross-dating creates continuous chronologies extending back 12,460 years. If 297 years were fabricated, tree ring records would show a gap. They don't. Ice core data from Greenland extends 123,000 years. Annual layers trap volcanic ash. Chemical signatures from known eruptions anchor the chronology. Astronomical records align perfectly across cultures. Solar eclipses, documented by Pliny the Elder in 59 AD, are confirmed by modern calculation. Tang Dynasty, eclipse observations from China match current chronology. Cross-cultural evidence makes fabrication impossible. If phantom time were true, 300 years of missing history would exist worldwide. But China's Tang Dynasty, the Islamic Golden Age, and the Byzantine Empire all left extensive independent records. The Battle of Talas in 751 AD, Chinese forces fighting Islamic forces in Central Asia, is documented by both civilizations independently. For phantom time to work, hostile empires would have had to coordinate fabrications for over 1,000 years without leaving evidence. This is physically impossible. Philosopher Karl Popper identified the core fallacy. Conspiracy theories grossly underestimate the random nature and unintended consequences of political and social actions. The difference between scholarly uncertainty and conspiracy thinking is fundamental. Historians acknowledge gaps, cite limitations, distinguish evidence from speculation. Conspiracy thinking fills gaps with speculation presented as fact and treats evidence against the theory as proof of cover-up. Uncertainty is real. Invented certainty is worse. The eras that history can't explain share a common pattern: the simultaneous failure of multiple recording systems. The Bronze Age collapse destroyed palace bureaucracies, linear bee writing, and international trade networks within a generation. The early medieval period lost Roman administrative capacity, widespread literacy, and economic complexity. The 17th century crisis left abundant records, but such traumatic discontinuity that historians still argue about unifying explanations. Prehistory represents the fundamental human condition, 99% of our existence without the writing that makes narrative history possible. These silences aren't evidence of conspiracies. They're evidence of how fragile the recording systems that create historical knowledge actually are. Writing requires trained scribes, supported by surplus economies. Scribes require institutions that employ them. Institutions require stable food supplies. Trade networks spread writing materials and ideas. When any of these elements fails, the others become vulnerable. When multiple elements fail simultaneously, the ink dries, the archive closes. No one replaces the dead scribes. The conspiracy theories that fill these gaps, Tartaria, mud flood, phantom time, emerge from universal human psychology. We need coherent narratives. Significant events demand proportionate explanations. Uncertainty feels uncomfortable, but the scientific evidence against these theories is overwhelming and convergent. Tree rings, ice cores, astronomical records, cross-cultural documentation, all produce the same timeline independently. The appropriate response to historical uncertainty isn't invented certainty. It's the recognition that absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, but neither is it evidence of cover-ups. Real historical inquiry requires tolerance for ambiguity, acknowledgement of limits, willingness to say, "We don't know," while continuing to investigate. I want to leave you with a thought. The past isn't a complete record that someone is hiding from you. The past is fundamentally incomplete because the systems that would have recorded it broke down or never existed in the first place. 117 billion human beings have lived on this planet. We know the names of perhaps a few million. The rest, their loves, their fears, their hopes, their small kindnesses, their private griefs, are gone. Not hidden, not suppressed. Not erased by conspiracy, just gone. The way a conversation is gone once the speakers have left the room. The way a song is gone once the singer has stopped. The way a life is gone once the person who lived it has died. History isn't a puzzle with missing pieces that someone is hoarding. History is a signal that degrades over distance. The further back you go, the fainter it gets, until eventually you're listening to silence. But here's the thing about silence. It's not nothing. Silence is the space where something used to be. And if you listen carefully, if you train yourself to hear what's not there, silence can tell you something. It can tell you that people lived, that they built things and broke things and loved things and lost things, that they were here, even if we'll never know their names. The era's history can't explain aren't failures of historians. They're reminders of what history actually is. Not a complete record, a partial signal, fading into silence, but still worth listening to. If this made you think differently about what we know and don't know about the past, about why some centuries go silent, subscribe for more. And leave a comment. What period of history do you wish we knew more about? What silence would you want to break? The best questions might shape a future documentary.